Welcome, everyone. Karen and I are so excited to have all of you here. We're talking about the Diversity and Equity in Coaching continuing education program that we're offering. And so excited about this program. It has been in the works for over 3 years, to let all of you know. So a lot has gone into this, and absolutely thrilled that Karen will be the one leading the program. She's got a ton of experience. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment. Many of you know me. For those of you who don't, I'm Kathy Liska. I'm the founder of the Center for Coaching Certification, which means I have the privilege of working with a ton of amazing people, including Karen. There's so many others on the team. Actually, Pan's here. Pan's on the team as well. And it's a wonderful team, a very diverse team, and everybody really cares about all that you do. So for us to bring this forward is super exciting. Karen, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kathy. So great to be here. I echo Kathy's sentiments. So exciting that this project is finally come to fruition. Really not a minute too soon. So many important conversations happening both today on the webinar and then in the larger program. So excited to have the chance to get to hear from you and get to know some of you a bit and answer questions about the program and so on. In the meantime, me personally, as Kathy said, been affiliated with the CCC for years. I'm an executive coach based outside of Boston. I'm also a facilitator, and just absolutely thrilled to be here. I've done a lot of work in cross-cultural competence and diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. It's a passion. It's important. So really just appreciate all of you showing up and having these conversations. So yeah. Thanks.
And Karen is a PCC credentialed coach as well. So
thank you.
Want to acknowledge that. All right, awesome. So let's move forward. In terms of the agenda for today, we're going to talk ethics of diversity. And actually, well, we got those reversed. So yeah. We're going to share with you, ACTO has taken a stand on diversity. ACTO is the Association of Coach Training Organizations. ICF has a statement about diversity. How is this significant to all of us? Well, think about it as professionals. It's saying, hey, our profession is really front and center on this topic, and that's huge to us. Then we'll move into the ethics of diversity, because there are specific things in the code of ethics that call on us to fully embrace diversity, honor it, and work with it, and expand what's happening in that world. The same is true of coaching competencies. Our coaching competencies call on us to be open and accepting, and that includes the diversity work. Our PCC markers also have association directly with diversity. And the PCC markers, I think most of you are familiar with them, are the specific behaviors that are evaluated when coaches work for a credential. And these are behaviors that demonstrate our competency as a coach. From there, we'll move into increasing awareness. And all of us have an opportunity to increase awareness for diversity and equity. And it's an incredible opportunity and so important to the profession and the world. We'll talk about doing a self-assessment. Hey, where am I at on this? We'll talk about the business assessment and evaluating our own coaching businesses. We'll talk about how we can increase access. And by increasing access, we're expanding our reach as coaches. We'll talk strategies. So the conversation today is highlights from the program overall. You'll walk away with some really good insights, things you can start playing with right now, and hopefully be really excited about the program that's being offered. So the ACTO stand for diversity, inclusion, and belonging is on the ACTO website. It's expressing very specifically the commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and inviting the uniqueness of all individuals and diverse life experiences. So That means ACTO as an organization is committed to eliminating the negative impact. And it goes on to talk about how as coach trainers, which is who ACTO is a membership organization for, is tasked with creating the future of the coaching profession, which means we commit to providing dialogue, learning, and resources for cultivating personal and organizational responsibility in alignment with this stand. The ICF statement for diversity, Karen's going to click for me. Thanks, Karen. All right. So, whoop. We live and work as members of ICF in more than 140 countries and territories. It's a global community. We have got to reflect on our blind spots, be aware of opportunities for improvement. We have core values of integrity, excellence, collaboration, and respect. And the foundation of these values is a shared commitment to diversity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. So it's at the forefront of the decisions made at ICF, and that makes sense for us as coaches too. So let's go into a few thoughts. So the bottom line, ethics is sorted into different areas. If you read the Code of Ethics, you'll see it'll talk about the responsibility to clients. If we are not embracing diversity and truly honoring and supporting diversity and equity, how are we going to provide the value that we're called upon to provide? So yes, it means ensuring value. The responsibility to practice and performance that's cited in our Code of Ethics is a call for excellence, and that definitely includes the diversity. The responsibility to professionalism speaks to the boundaries that we all set. And you got a little bit ahead of me, Karen. The responsibility to society. I love this one. Number 28 in the Code of Ethics calls on us to do good. Do good is more than do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. Do good is proactively get out there and do good. And so crucial. And to me, a big piece of doing good is social justice. Absolutely got to be there. So now let's go into our next one. There are several specific things from the Code of Ethics that speak to diversity and equity. And so we're throwing these numbers up. There's more. My invitation to all of you is to go back and read the Code of Ethics and look at that. Because very specifically, if we are ethical as coaches, it means fully engaging. It means embracing and honoring diversity, supporting equity, working for that in our world. And we've all got to be doing it as coaches. In the class, Karen's going to dig into that and explore that with you. You'll have those conversations. So this is a starting point for you to look at specific points in your Code of Ethics. Let's do the same thing with our competencies now. And there are, got a poll for you. We're going to launch this, and I'm going to ask all of you on your screen. The poll is there. There's 3 different questions. And put your answers in on those 3 questions.
Kathy, I just realized, is it only attendees who can do this?
Oh, that could be. Are you all not seeing it?
Their status. Yeah.
Okay.
We can give us just a moment, folks. We'll change your status. Apologies. We can change it back now.
Okay. So I'll tell you what, the 3 questions are on your slide. Let's have you put it in the chat box.
Even better.
So the first question, how much diversity was there in your coach training experience? None, a little, some of the students, some of the trainers, fairly diverse, very diverse. Put your answer in the chat box and
can you
have that there.
We could end
All
it.
right, so we're getting a little, we're getting very diverse. So we've got a couple of people responding there. How open was your coach trainer? This is question 2, to discussing diversity and equity. So we're curious about that. And responses there. And if you want, when you're putting in those answers, you can add numbers to the questions. So that was number 2. We got our first answer on it, completely open, which is really good to know. Very open. Awesome. And then the third question, how much did you dig into diversity and equity in your coach training? Not at all, a little, as fit the discussion, or extensively. And I'll share part of the conversation we're having in the coach training world is what are things we add? And of course, the challenge is very much we're developing these competencies and these skills. So inherently, we want that a part of it. And how do we overtly bring up that conversation in a way that is effective and really supports people learning as they become a coach? So those pieces are there. Karen, let's go on to the next one.
And Kathy, can I ask you to close the poll from your side, if it will?
And yes, got that done. All right.
It's still showing up in the center of my screen. Sorry, folks, technical moment.
It may be you have to just close it, exit.
Yeah.
And so I'm closing it. I don't have it anymore in mine. So it may be you just.
Yeah, there's something happening, but it's fine. I'll adjust. Go for it.
Okay. All right.
That's fine.
So the competencies, we have 8 core competencies as coaches. This is based on the updated version the ICF put out. When you read these competencies, there are specific things that speak to diversity. And so as coaches, we're called on for this. So competency 1 demonstrates the ethical practice. And part of that is being sensitive to the client's identity, their experiences, and their beliefs. Competency 2 embodies a coaching mindset means we're aware of and open to the influence of context and culture. Competency 3, establishing and maintaining the agreement. We partner with our clients for that. Competency 4, if we're going to have trust and safety, we have got to demonstrate respect for our client. Competency 5, being present, means we're empathetic, responsive, and curious. Competency 6, listening, very specifically states, consider the client identity and environment. Evokes awareness, means thinking about the client experience and asking about their thinking. And then the client growth includes promoting client autonomy for applying their own learning. And Karen, let's move forward.
Absolutely. I was thinking, Kathy, if I could, you mentioned to me what your experience with the New England chapters. And I was wondering if that's something that you wanted to share. I think
absolutely. Absolutely. So this morning I had the privilege of being on a panel that presented to 10 chapters, Northeastern United States and on up into Canada. So 10 ICF chapters. And one of the polls that I included was, if you don't think you are a racist, is it possible that you still exhibit racist behaviors? And it was a large group. And with the exception of one person, everybody said, yes, we do still exhibit those racist behaviors. So here's a scenario we gave people to think about. Imagine you have a client in the corporate world and they want a promotion. And imagine knowing that organization, being familiar with their culture and thinking, oh my gosh, race and gender limit opportunities in this company. And so then as a coach, instead of focusing on strategies for promotion, you're focusing on asking the client about a plan B, thinking, okay, it ain't going to work for them. Well, guess what that is? That's a racist behavior. We're supporting systemic bias if we do that. And so that evokes so much discussion in the conversation this morning. So it was really fun to go there. You see on your screen, there are specific subpoints. My recommendation to all of you, you can either grab out your copy of the core competencies or simply note these if it's really a quick way for you to do it. So the competencies themselves and the subpoints speak to diversity and equity. Karen, let's move through these slides, give people a chance to capture what they are and note them, because there are so many points in our competencies. Understanding the client within their context, being open and transparent, and identifying factors, this is the big one, that influence current and future patterns of behavior, thinking, or emotions. Well, that calls on us to have a tremendous amount of understanding of the client and who they are. Let's keep going. The PCC markers are the behaviors that get evaluated, and diversity and equity are called for within the ethics and competencies. That means demonstrating the ethics and the competencies means being open and accepting and embracing diversity, and the markers do notice that. So when we acknowledge and support client expression, act in response to the whole person of the client, and are curious about our client. And the next one, Karen. When our questions and our observations are based on who the client is, their situation, we explore how they perceive their world. We ask about their current and future way of thinking, feeling, beliefs, behaviors, and partner with them to consider how they're moving forward. All of these include the diversity piece and demonstrating our openness and accepting. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. I just want to add, first of all, I just want to thank you, Kathy. And this is one of those conversations we have as facilitators. We, on the one hand, you're talking about the PCC markers and the ethics. We're reading different things. It might, can seem a little dry, though Kathy certainly does a great job of bringing it to life. But we really decided that it was really an important way to start the conversation, even though we're going to move on and get a little bit more now into giving you a taste of what you can expect through the 6-week course that we're going to be running. But the idea was that there are these incredibly important, critical conversations, so critical that ACTO, as Kathy said, has had it in its mandate for years, and the ICF has, happily come along and, kind of creating it in really at the deepest mandates of our profession. And what we're finding is that coaches, frankly, like everyone else in the world, are sort of saying, I want to have these conversations. I want to think about these things for myself. I want to understand my own bias. Or maybe for some people, they're further down the track and there are already, sort of feel like they're somewhat experts, but, the growth continues. And maybe there are folks at the other end of the continuum where they're kind of hearing about this and they don't really know that much, or maybe it seems scary, or like if you start to talk about it, it's going to be a conflict or a problem. And so people are sort of asking, where do coaches go to have these conversations? And I'm thrilled to say the answer is this program. This is where you come for this conversation. Just like in this webinar where, we really want to, in this, mini hour here, really, I think you can already tell from the tone Kathy has set that, that it's a tone of zero judgment, but really just growth and learning. And, we have a facilitator, it's going to be me, making sure that it's a safe conversation where people can be themselves and have confidentiality and have psychological safety and ask some of the tougher questions and learn from each other. But at the same time, really making sure that people feel like they get their questions answered, and more important, elevating ourselves so that we're able to do this. Got a great question in the chat bar just now from Deborah. She asks, do you have to be at a specific coaching level to partake in the course? And the answer is human. You have to be human level, even though Pan's dog is a close second. I don't know, because that's a very cute dog. So we might make an exception, but no, absolutely not. We'd love for anyone to join. And so we want to give you a little bit of a taste now over the next little chunk of time that we have left. to just sort of first get a sense of how this process even works. And might be something that's very familiar to some of you. But we're engaging in a framework that starts with our own awareness, with we're increasing awareness of ourselves, of other people. That's really going to be, we're just giving a little taste here, but we're talking about during the program that we're going to be running 6 weeks of an hour-and-a-half session each time. And then there's online learning in between where we'll be involved in interesting conversations. There'll be a little bit of what we call homework, but it's really posting self-reflections so that we can keep the learning sustainable, because we're committed to everybody being busy, as Vivian posted earlier in the chat bar. It's pretty hard to multitask, even for, as hard as we all try. We want to make sure that when you finish this 6 weeks, you've really moved the needle and you've gotten somewhere. So that will include looking at our perceptions, looking at, who has access to coaching and who doesn't. And the truth is that there are underrepresented populations. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what we can do about that as coaches. So there's really this dichotomy that you're going to experience throughout the whole program, which we hope you'll feel here today, which is thinking about yourself. And, as Kathy kind of got us started with, folks earlier today who were thinking about their own racist behaviors and how does that show up, but then also thinking about our coaching practices and how will it benefit, from the bottom line of sort of working on these things, but more importantly, making sure that we're doing good in the world. And how do we kind of look at both of those things at the same time? What choices do we make? And that's really going to be around how we handle the business assessment and that type of thing. How do we show up in the world? What's our messaging look like to folks? And then making connections with other coaches. So there'll be great networking opportunities, just again, at the human level, but also just getting to know each other as coaches. And really just can't emphasize enough how much it's all about just learning and openness. When we are working as people to learn about diversity and equity and moving towards inclusion and belonging, we have to look at norms. We have to look at, what do I think the norms are based on the values I hold versus you or anyone else on the call? How are they different? Where do they clash? How does that happen with certain coachees, perhaps? Where do we make assumptions or misunderstand? That us having a better understanding of that would help us to serve them better. And of course, there's, as Kathy called it the other day when we were talking, I think she said, was it euphoria or nirvana? Because we talked about the fact that sadly, at this point in our culture, we don't have it all done. There isn't a place where everything is just perfect, rainbows and unicorns, and there's no racism and there's no homophobia and there's no anti-Semitism and none of any of the isms, right? That doesn't exist, but we have to work towards it. Really, that's what we're doing. And so for folks who are listening and thinking, what's that one thing I can do? What are those couple of things I can do? That's what we're going to be talking about in the program. So before I move on, any questions? You can either put them in the chat or you can let us know, raise your hand, just to take yourself off mute. Okay. Well, feel free as we're going, if you think of anything, to let us know. We'd be happy to hear. So
I'll just add the win-win. It's a win for you as a coach when you embrace this conversation, this exploration. It's a win for your clients, and it's a win for society. And the more we do this, the more we engage, the more we are moving this forward, moving that needle. So, yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that. You're absolutely spot on. So here's a neat example of the kind of thing we'll be doing and really unpacking, again, of course, in much more depth in the program. But this is an example of the type of activity that we do to have people start to think about how the groups to which you belong, maybe you were even just born into them, maybe you made choices in your life, and as a result, what privilege are we afforded just because of X, Y, or Z? So this is a really cool little way of just taking a look. So for example, if you're able, if you took these 8 folks and you said, please take a step forward if you're male. Oops. Please take a step forward if you're male. What would we see? So, the idea here, by the way, is that the top of the screen is representing what research shows in real life, which is the ability to earn, the ability to own property, to have higher education. It affects healthcare. It affects everything. So, this is an idea where just because of how you happen to be born, if you're male or female, you're already ahead of the game. Same thing with being right-handed, of all things. I'm thinking of my own mom, who I remember when, she was a kid, she was born in the Boston area, and her family forced her to go from being left-handed to right-handed. I guess they knew something. And that's interesting. Being heterosexual means you take a step forward. So just who you love affects that. You have, folks have a privilege right there, based on nothing they've done for the necessarily. Being white, that's one that we talk about a lot, but it is important to see here that it's not just white privilege. Owning a home gives you lots of other advantages that show up. And again, having a college education is yet another one. So really interesting as we see that. I'm curious, love to hear your reaction to this. I'll give you a moment to think about it. Again, you're welcome to make a comment or ask a question, either verbally or in the chat. What are you thinking? Teresa wrote, this is a great visual of reality. Yeah. It can be hard to see sometimes though, right? Can be tough. Jane added, I hit a lot of the white privilege marks. Okay. Appreciate the candor, Jane. It's great for us to realize that about ourselves. Wyatt has written, it is my daily life. I appreciate the open discussions. Thank you, Wyatt. Appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Deborah has said, a lot of my recent coursework has been addressing diversity and equity. That's great to hear.
It reminds me of growing up in the South during integration. And as a child, I just didn't understand that I was privileged and why was I being persecuted? And it's amazing what 50 years later is done. I just didn't get it. As a little kid, I loved everybody. It was a really interesting impact of going through that period.
Yeah, I like Lisa's comment, interesting. And the reason I like it so much, Lisa, is because it so totally resonates. We forget to think about these little things in our life that give us privileges that we didn't even realize. Who thinks about whether you're right-handed gives you a privilege? And it does. And there's so many things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll be honest and say, and thank you, Pan, for your candor too. And thanks that I missed that comment. But even the fact that some of us can talk about, kind of what we did or didn't think about in and of itself is a privilege. I am white, and I have friends who are also white. And when people will think about whether or not they want to have the conversation. Well, I also have family members who are Black, and guess what? They don't have a choice. Right? They're the people receiving that, or the same things, I might be able to relate to other groups that are experiencing that. But, that's really the whole point is, that sort of privilege is everywhere. The real question is, why does it matter? What is it that we're missing out on or not understanding based on this? And that's going to bring us into a conversation again in the course, much more in depth. But we want to talk about the differences between equality, equity, systemic equity. So as you see this picture, I'm going to give you a minute to react in the chat bar. What does this make you think as you look at this? Oops, I'm sorry about that.
Can I just say something? Because I know for one of my courses that I just recently came out of, a lot of my classmates, and we're all graduate level, I was surprised by how many people didn't grasp the concept of equality and equity, right? So this photo shows us equality. There's a fence, everybody's getting the same box. However, equity would be, for example, the person in the wheelchair needing a higher box to see over the fence, and the taller person, right, needing the lower box, like that shows. But then I feel like removing systemic barriers would be just removing the fence altogether. Ah, Kathy, you're so good, Karen. Yeah, so it's funny that
I worked so hard on putting this together to show this, and you just called it out, Deborah. That was awesome.
That just blew my mind.
I used
Wow.
somewhat this visual and to explain to my classmates what this was. And I literally drew all of this on our whiteboard in class, and everyone was just in awe that they hadn't even realized the difference between, right, all 2 and all 3.
Great comments. I appreciate that. And just to make sure we catch everyone up, and I've seen some great comments in the chat, which we'll come back to as well, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. And we didn't even pay her to say that. That was just.
Yeah. And Vivian,
awesome. Yeah.
I like your point, removing the wall. So when you think about going to the zoo, it'd be great if that wall were glass and everyone saw through it the same. I didn't have, when I was creating these images, I didn't have that available to me. So I really like the point though.
Yeah, it's a great point. And then we want to think about what it means for our lives, right? So, equality in this case, which we've talked about and a lot of us have heard about, and some of the laws in our country have been written for, we've kind of discovered that they're problematic, right? They're not working if you just give everyone equal, but they're not having equal circumstances. Well, as we can see, it doesn't help the reality of the person. And often what happens in our culture even more is that the person, in this case, the person on the far right, would be blamed for that. Why do you want more? Why do you need more? Why are you special? Those are the kinds of attitudes that we've heard. So then we take a stab at it with equity, and that's great. I mean, that's exactly what we want. We want for people to get the accommodations or the things that they need that are fair, that are sort of making the way you live your life equitable. So if you started from a better place, like we just talked about with right-handedness privilege, or these other things, you have a college degree or whatever it is, this is a way of making things more equal. But
and I look at this and I think, how does the person in the wheelchair even get on top of that? It brings up a whole nother issue.
but what does that represent in our culture, Kathy?
Yeah.
When we talk about systemic isms, racism, and so on, that you're again making the point. So it can look like it's equitable, but to your point, where's the ramp, right? How do we do that? What does that mean for people who are trying to get mortgages, or who come from generations and generations of people who haven't received higher degrees or don't have the same access to any of those kinds of things? And this is where, of course, the comment comes in, because it's sort of like, this is it. This is what we're going for. So our little way of doing that, at the Center for Coaching Certification, is for us to start with a class like this, where we can create a place to have the conversation. That's the goal. The goal is, how do we increase awareness, understand our own identity and values, and explore our own lenses and our own biases, and get that stuff out of the way so that we can at least be, the best we can be as coaches. So that's really what we're going for. But any other thoughts or comments first, and then I'll address what's in the chat. Anyone want to add anything?
Actually, I so do, if it's okay. When we did the presentation this morning, here's another example we gave, and it speaks to this. Imagine you have a client and they're creating policies for an organization. And in working with them, you realize that those policies totally fall short in terms of diversity and inclusion. So what are you supposed to do as a coach? And here's what my push is. If you don't share that observation or ask a question because you're afraid of having your own agenda, then we're falling short. And so that's a push. And it goes back to ethics. So, okay. Sorry, Karen, I get too excited about this stuff.
It's important. And you're making a critical point. We all have to ask ourselves as coaches, where do we stop with the questions? Where is that line? Do we sometimes not ask because we're not sure how to have the conversation? We're not sure what will come back at us, or whether or not we can deal with the person's vulnerability or our own fears, or our own work really that we haven't done. And the more we do our own work and we get there ourselves, the more we can show up for them and have those conversations in earnest. It's really what we want to be doing. And I appreciated, Pan adding, you can both be privileged in some areas and not in others. Really important point. Thanks for that. And Vivian, of course, we agree about getting rid of the wall. And then Leslie, again, a really well-timed comment there. We're going to be digging into talking about images and I think thinking about status in our culture and the way we think about that is very related. Yeah, it's a great point. Lisa's just added, it's important to bring it up because so much of this isn't because people want to put others at disadvantages. Perhaps they just don't realize. And that's such a great point, Lisa. It's one of the reasons that it's so easy for us to create a safe environment. I mean, I'm not saying everybody on earth shows up and sings Kumbaya, but a lot of the time intentions are good. And we do want to focus on that. We want to give people tools so that their actions will match their intentions, their comments, their behaviors will match. So yeah, love that. Thank you. Thank you for that. So again, just to give a flavor and want to make sure that we honor time and have time for questions and all that, but just give you a taste of some of the things that you'll expect that we'll spend whole classes on, where you're really thinking about, where did my values come from? Where did my norms come from? In this case, kind of looking at lots of different ways that we can increase awareness. And one of the main ways of doing that is to study your own identity and really understand what are my groups? What did they teach me? And you know what a lot of adults run into, I find in this work, some of those values aren't serving me anymore. They helped me get through my early life. They were important in the school I was in, or in the religious organization that I was raised in, or even in the family I was in, which some of us figure out maybe wasn't so functional. But as an adult moving forward, what values do I choose? And they affect our behavior and how we see everything, right? As we start to think about like what shapes our lenses, literally as you look through the lens of the culture that you were raised in, this is telling you how to assign meaning to everyone else's behavior and what things mean. That was a cool use of a prop, right? I enjoyed that. It also helps me see better. So like that. But anyway, all joking aside, kind of what we're taught in school and what to expect and all of these things, this is all coming together. And the truth is that we have that bias that we've been taught. We have those stereotypes. And how do we recognize them? How do we have that conversation? So one of the things that we would do is we would have you assess your biases. As we promised, there's a self-assessment. Again, where do you get to do this? Who helps walk you through this? How do you know what to do? We are not going to have that conversation here. This is one of the activities in the course we'll do. We're not going to have you answer these questions now. And the reason is, in this webinar so far, we haven't laid the foundation that you need to do that safely and effectively. Prior to doing this in the course, we'll have engaged in this work together. We'll have committed to confidentiality. We'll have worked through other topics together and gotten to know each other. And that's a really important part of this. So, sometimes when you see people doing this kind of work, or you have a one-off hour-and-a-half training or something happens, I sort of feel like I'm almost watching someone do surgery. They open the patient up on the table and then just leave the room. And we want to make sure that people are feeling sewn up again at the end of the day. Not to say that I'm not really sure if that's the best way to market a class, right? That I'm comparing to surgery. At least it's elective, it's covered by insurance. I don't know how to make it sound positive. No, I'll let that go. But all joking aside, it's that idea of, making sure that the right environment is in place. But this will be part of what we do. So one of the things we want to ask you now that we can feel comfortable kind of saying, because this is a little bit more benign, though still a bit provocative, to make you coming here today. We're happy you're here. Reflect on how comfortable you are coaching someone who's different from you. And again, doesn't have to be race or some of the big things that come up, someone's gender status or age or ethnicity. Sometimes it's a neurodivergence difference. Sometimes it's, just someone who, has a totally different communication style. And you find that you might be misunderstanding them a lot. So I would really love to hear from a couple of people. If you're comfortable, if you're comfortable putting it in the chat, great. Let me just go back to that for a minute. Or you can just tell us, how comfortable are you? Boy, technical. Coaching someone who's different from you. Thoughts from people. Someone going to say something?
I wanted to say something. This is Vivian. I'm sorry for multitasking and all, but I think this question is a good question, because my work experience has been at institutions that, well, the first one wasn't so diverse, but the second was very diverse. And I always said, I don't have control over who's going to walk in the door on a given day.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to learn to be very comfortable with whoever walked in the door, to be able to respond to the questions, to do whatever needed to be done. So, and I can't think of any instance where I had any kind of, visceral reaction or any kind of negative reaction to someone who came in and didn't feel that I could serve them properly. So I guess it's kind of where you come from, or where you've already worked that makes a difference.
I think you're right. Your life's experiences and your worldview are definitely going to shape how you answer this question. Thanks for sharing that, Vivian. Absolutely. How comfortable I am. And in your case, you learned, it sounds like, maybe at a young age, how to make sure you were comfortable. That's what you needed to do to get your work done. Yeah. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to add anything?
I like to think I would be comfortable, but I think it's also important to be aware of the potential challenges or potential areas where you may not fully understand. So maybe it would be worthwhile to have the conversation up front to be able to ask even more questions than you normally would as a coach. Just to get that background and really understand where they're coming from.
Great. Yeah. And the question is, prior to this conversation, would you have thought about that?
I think I would have thought of it in the moment. Like if I was struggling to really grasp what they're thinking, I would know enough to say, okay, we need to back up and I need to ask more questions. After this conversation, I can see how that would be more likely to happen and be more prepared for it.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that contribution, both of what you've said here and Vivian's addition as well. And it really demonstrates what we're trying to do, because if you think about it, the two things that were just said weren't said by Kathy or by me. Right. And that's the thing, is all of the richness that the coaches will bring to this conversation is really just, that's the stuff, as my husband says, that it's the gold, so thank you for that. And again, for your candor. And I can really relate. I'll share that earlier in my career, I spent 3 years living in Japan, and I struggled from a communication perspective. There were value differences, it turned out. Really deeply held values that I didn't understand at that time. I was young. It was prior to, my master's degree, where I learned more about cultural differences and, 20 years of experience and that kind of thing that I didn't have. And I just thought, what's wrong with these people? Why don't they tell me what they're thinking? Well, it's obviously them. That really great attitude that we hear sometimes, and, I had been taught that you are direct in communication, that you have a conflict. If you have a problem, you tell it, you talk about how you feel. And I remember having colleagues ask me, do you always feel like you have to tell everyone what you're thinking and feeling? It's very childish. And it was like, whoa, that is a very different way of looking at that. And then having people be extremely indirect. And probably after about 1.5 years, I figured out that all of Asia wasn't wrong and that maybe it was me. And that was a hard thing to realize. And I'm obviously being a little bit tongue in cheek, but that sense of kind of figuring out where I came in and what I'd been taught, and sort of realizing, wait a minute, is it serving me here in this culture with these people? No. How do I need to adapt to have the actual impact I want to have? How do I get alignment there? And I learned, and when I came home, my family was a little shocked with how polite and indirect I seemed, which was interesting. But I was, all joking aside, of course, have, you know, as we all do, we hopefully learn to adapt our communication style when necessary, and that's part of it. Another great comment here, Deborah has added in the chat box, there's great literature out there, absolutely, thank you. A book that Deborah references a lot by Verna Myers, What If I Say the Wrong Thing? 25 Habits for Culturally Effective People. And
I'm throwing a link to the book on Amazon in the chat box too, if anybody wants to grab it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Great. Another example of what we get from working together. And we already sort of talked about this, but just again here rhetorically, want to give you a chance to think about how you might answer this question differently, or just other things that we have yet to kind of not know what we don't know, or what we haven't talked about yet that we will be able to talk in the program. So wanted to also just introduce the concept that we told you we'll be doing the business assessment. This is where the comment Leslie made earlier in the chat comes in as well. You know, take a look at the pictures that you're including in your social media, on your website. You know, who sees themselves in those pictures, right? You know, who's there, who isn't, what images and language and messaging are you using? What events do you support or not support with your coaching practice? You know, and that's just one little slice of it in terms of, you know, kind of really looking at, you know, our organizational culture and how we contribute to that, and with whom do we collaborate, and, you know, how do we go about our business? What's our coaching agreement like? What's the wording like? There are so many different things to consider there that we will talk about in much more depth. So another really interesting piece here is increasing access specifically to underrepresented groups who don't have that chance to be coached. And we, again, will ask you to think about, you know, who are you coaching, and who are you not coaching? Who doesn't have access to coaching, and why? Is it only socioeconomic? Not always. Sometimes it's cultural, and people don't have a sense of kind of what they can get out of it and what that means. And what can you do about that? Or do you even care? You know, like, give us a chance to convince you as to why you should. But, you know, all joking aside, you know, there are organizations where business resource groups, the BRGs and the ERGs are you know, sort of working on things and having this conversation. And we want to have a chance to think about what can we do. Some coaches are donating their time, or working on a sliding scale, or, you know, sort of doing things with the ICF, or showing up at this type of program and thinking about how you can work on it. You know, I'm curious what you think. Why does this matter? If it does to you, what are your thoughts?
This is Teresa. I just, this is really making me think about even my niche. So I've really specialized and said, you know, I'm focused more on women, around body acceptance. And I'm really, you know, not that I wouldn't, if a male came forward and said, you know, he wanted to work on that, I wouldn't, but it just makes me wonder, you know, even my marketing and all of that. It's not that I'm not open to others. It's just, I just would love your feedback on that. Like, is that too being exclusive, not being inclusive to anyone, right?
Yeah.
Kathy or Karen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that your comment is useful for everyone, and it's amazing that it's already made you think about that. And of course, I'm a coach, so I'm going to follow up with a question, you know, and I would ask you, what do you think about it, Teresa? What is it telling you?
Yeah, it's making, I mean, just this whole, the whole awareness, it's like, oh, okay, I've been kind of narrowed so down, and it does make me feel very exclusive, you know, that I'm not being so open. Yeah, it's just really opening my eyes, I guess, is a good thing.
which is music to my ears. So thank you. It's nice to hear. It's also great. You know, I think you're saying something a lot of us can relate to. There's that fine line between making sure you have your niche, knowing how to be there for your clients, and choosing your group, and kind of putting your flag in the ground, and sort of saying, this is what I do. But then, as you're pointing out, where does it cross the line into exclusion? Exactly the kinds of things that we will be assessing. So thanks for that. Appreciate that. So we're also going to be just making sure that you leave with lots of practical strategies and techniques. And here you're sort of taking a look at a mix of things that will have you think about and be doing, you know, kind of doing everything from a moral perspective, and really encouraging that self-reflective practice and engaging in conversations, and kind of learning how to accept the emotions with your coachees, excuse me, and then having that cultural humility. And we had a conversation about the word humility, and Kathy is so passionate, you know, around these kinds of areas, and she's definitely had a great, I don't know, rubbed off on me in a great way with these kinds of things, because it's really about, you know, none of us can know everything about every culture, but kind of going into it with that feeling of, you know, a curious mindset. And I have something to learn. Yes, I have my way, but is it best? Are there other ways? How do I work with that? And again, we want to be able to make sure that, you know, folks are feeling equipped for how to do that. So, you know, bottom line, we never would want to monetize this, and we wondered whether or not to even mention it. But the truth is that across all sectors, organizations, companies that focus on increasing diversity and equity and inclusion also do better from the bottom line perspective. It's just the way it is. That's what the research shows. Again, we thought about whether or not, so you could give us feedback on that later, but it is a fact. Other things that you'll, you know, come out of it, again, just sort of having had that chance to do that awareness building, that those assessments, expanding that reach, and so on. So as we you know, sort of start to wind down, just really want to hear from you. What was a takeaway from this webinar for you? Love to have folks open up your chat bar, set it to everyone, and hear from you. What's a takeaway for you? Teresa said, got me thinking. Yeah, and I appreciated hearing your comment. Thanks, Teresa. I appreciate that. What else? Lisa said, the need to be aware of others' differences and be willing to ask how to best serve them. Great way to put that. Thank you. I hear typing, so I'll be patient. Let's see, Pan added a commitment to do more work in this area for my practice. Well, I'm thrilled to hear that it had that impact on you, Pan. Thank you for sharing that. Sheikh says, and again, my apologies if I'm not saying your name correctly, please tell me. To respect diversity and live with harmony. Wonderful. Vivian's added that you're concerned about diversity, not because it's popular right now, but a need to serve a variety of communities. Yeah, that's exactly the way to look at it.
Well, and Vivian, let me say, because it's the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's, yeah. And it's just not even optional for us. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Leslie added, for me, being honest and self-aware of who I might be comfortable or uncomfortable working with. Good for you. You know, again, these are the kinds of things we say them out loud. They have power, and then they have the ability to change. So that's just a wonderful thing. So thank you all for setting that tone with us. So we were thrilled to have you here in this webinar. We also want to, of course, welcome you to join us in the course that we'll be running, shameless marketing for the next 60 seconds, if that's okay with folks. We've put the registration link in the chat bar. We've also added it here on the screen for folks who may be watching later on YouTube. But really want to give anyone a chance. Do you have questions about the class, what to expect or not? Things you want to know? Anything we can answer?
How often are you going to be having cohorts for this course?
That's a great question. I can say that it's really based on demand. Is that the way you'd answer it, Kathy?
Yeah, and I'll put a link to the schedule. We've got a couple of classes scheduled and we're piloting this. As I said, the work on this started 3 years ago. It is a brand new one for us. So we have no idea what the interest is. And the more you can help us spread the word about this being an available program, it is approved by the ICF for 12 hours of continuing coach education. So if you're renewing membership or a credential and you're looking for those hours, it's got bang for the buck in it. And then the links for the overview, the application, and the schedule are in your chat box. And we hope that people get really excited about this program, and we hope that it expands the conversation and keeps it going and keeps it alive.
And we would continue to run it, to answer the original question as much as folks wanted it. So I'm sorry if it's a bit vague. We do have, 2 original schedules there ready to go, and hoping we'll get enough sign up for those. Thanks for that. Other questions? What do you want to know?
You mentioned that this is being recorded and will be on YouTube. And if I missed your comments about it before, I'm sorry, but how soon would that be available? Because I wound up having 2 things scheduled at the same time. Once I agreed to the first one, then this one popped up and I said, oh, I got to do this one. So
Vivian, as fast as I can convert the recording and load it on YouTube, I will get it there. And then of course I send the link to everybody who registered. So you'll have the direct link. Certainly you can go to our YouTube anytime. And there's lots of stuff there.
Would you put your YouTube in the bar as well, Kathy? And we'll both put it on our LinkedIn as well. You're welcome to link in with both of us.
Okay.
Yeah. I think everyone knows our names, but just in case.
So I'll put the link to the YouTube channel in the chat box. It's also, if you just go to the website, we've got all the social media icons. You can access it directly. And then when it's loaded, I'll give you a direct link to this particular video.
Okay.
Thank you. What did we do before all this when we had meetings and, so amazing to think about.
Yeah. And by the way, everybody, if you want to save the chat, and it saves up until the time at which you saved it, there are 3 dots next to where you can type into the chat box. And if you click on it, it gives you the option of saving the chat. And then it will save on your computer and you can access all these great things that were shared there.
Thank you. That's such a great idea. So we're coming to the close of our webinar. Kathy and I are absolutely happy to hang out. I'll give you the chance to close in a moment too. Before, I just want to say, if people have questions, like I said, I'm happy to be here and answer them. Otherwise, I really appreciated everyone's engagement and just your comments and your thoughtfulness and candor today. And I think it's a great taste of what's to come in our program. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you from me and Kathy.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited we're doing this. And I really want to see it take off, because this conversation is so important and we've got to have a way to have it and keep it going. So thank you for being here. Thank you for helping spread the word, and definitely hope to keep the conversation going with you too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.